Oh, this is the moment to introduce our first speaker of the scenario track today. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome David Rosenthal on stage. David, and please join me in welcoming him with a huge applause. David is, I would say, I'm not exaggerating, the number one expert from the legal perspective. He's a lawyer who probably understands the AI world better than any other lawyer. I'm sorry if there's lawyers in the room. I don't want to offend anybody.
Any lawyers?
Okay, great. So,
okay.
First
sorry.
exception. Very sorry. No, so the point is, David has a even better. David has a good understanding not only from the legal side but also from the technical side, and this is very important these days because there's no point if we make legal frameworks and then they have no substance because they are not manifested by the technical advancements. If you want to follow David on LinkedIn, you will see that David is posting a lot of useful frameworks and methodologies that people can use. And in particular, what I like when he's posting something in the morning, an hour later, he has 300, 500,000 likes. This is really tremendous. And this shows the content and the value that David is generating. So it's really a pleasure to have David here on stage. David, tell us what you have to tell us.
Thank you. You see, the reason why he's saying that is that I'm so stupid that on a sunny Sunday afternoon, I'm sitting in front of my computer and starting to get into the math, for example, on how LLMs work. I mean, no reasonable lawyer would do that. However, I think it's important to understand really not only the technology, but also the concepts of what we're talking about in the area of AI. And what I want to talk to you about is how you can then talk to your lawyers and how to deal with them and how to understand them, where they're coming from, because you won't do it without them. And if you do, I will show you an example at the end, then it may end up in problems. However, you first have to understand, and I'm a lawyer myself, so I can make these statements without any problem. You first have to understand where they're coming from emotionally to see how basically what they see and read in the press and how they then react to it. Uncontrolled AI, legal nightmares for years to come. Okay, some may say that's good because that creates business. And I don't like a lot of regulation, but it drives our business, and this is good. Basically, the legal iceberg, which is not so good if people come to me and say me exactly what is the issue, and I have to answer them because you always expect that the lawyers always know what this is all about. Litigation, big data, big problems, and actually, is it a threat to us? So will we be replaced at one point in time? Because we're seeing the same thing as we've seen in other areas where people get access to information, to tools where they think now they can solve the problem. And among us, actually, if you go, there are some clients where we get drafts where we say it would have been better if they have asked ChatGPT to create the draft. It would have been a better start off. So actually, that's something, I'm not talking about how to use it in the legal sector. We're also doing that. But one problem that we have is that the lawyers themselves know that they don't know, and they don't trust really their own knowledge of AI, which is one of the underlying problems. And the other one is that they're focused they are faced actually with so much information in their own area, not talking about the technology, that they're extremely overwhelmed. So you've seen about the AI Act stuff, which is not so relevant as many people believe, because it has a rather narrow area of application, and I won't talk about the AI Act really, but for most applications it's not really practically relevant. But you can end up in a problem there. And you see, of course, that's one of many regulations where you have to dive into that and understand actually what's in there. And if I ask people who has read this from A to Z, nobody will say yes. And if you ask people, for example, there is one guy who has drafted a fourth of that. If you ask him, what does it mean? He himself says, I'm not sure, and I don't know really, because that's how these things are created. So that's a bit of a problem. That's actually the guy, and you can read what he is saying also on LinkedIn. So he wrote a large part of this, where he then comes up and saying, no, this doesn't really work, and combined this would significantly rise compliance costs, etc., too risky, etc. So it's not really promising what is coming out of it. Nevertheless, you have to deal with it, and you will be facing such type of responses from your lawyers, from your legal departments when you deal with them. Now, some of you will find that good, because some of you will say, I'm also having my message, for example, from the security side, and I don't want people to invest or to move forward too fast in these areas without considering, and maybe the lawyers can be my ally to actually slow down certain progress in certain areas. So it all depends a bit on where you're coming from. But what I want to talk to you is about how to deal with lawyers, with legal in the area of AI. And I have you 3 points. And by the way, for those who are taking pictures, you can get those slides. It's no problem. It's actually 3 things. First, get aligned and bridge the gaps. What I'm doing here is also part of it. It's about educating lawyers, but also educating yourself where are actually really the legal problems. Because you also read those headlines and don't believe them all. It's not so problematic as you may think. It's more like us dealing with a beast that we don't know. And if we don't know, we have a lot of fear. So also on all sides, it's a bit emotional with regard to that. And we have to accept that some things remain unclear. And we will come to that point. The second point, you always have to keep in mind, and that's a bit an interesting discussion or point I want to mention here in this community is that with a lot of engineers, I assume, is that we're not talking about is it compliant or not. We're talking about risk and risk management and risk-based approaches. So don't come and say, is this all legal to do? You will get an answer, as you always will get from lawyers, but it's not this black and white approach as maybe in other areas. And that's something that you need to understand and approach these kind of projects, which is what we're doing. So we are very often in AI projects no longer looking at is it compliant or not. We're looking at what is the actual risk that remains, and there's always something that remains. Something that we've seen, for example, a lot in the cloud debate. Some of you have been involved in that, and we've been very actively in that regard. Also proposed some of those models that are today used. But there, the difference was it was not driven by the general business. Now, AI is driven by everyone in the company, and that's making or increasing the pressure. And despite that, invest in governance. You may not like governance beyond what you're doing in your area, but it is something that can help you and that will be your ally in also moving forward. And those are the 3 points I want to talk about. First, start about educating lawyers with regard to AI. Most lawyers have access to all the information that would be necessary to understand how these things work. I didn't know how a neural network worked before I studied it. I didn't know how an LLM worked. Of course, I've used it, and I know, okay, it's estimating probabilities and this kind of thing, but how does it really work? And it takes this time, and you should get your legal to go into that area and to understand what you're talking about, because you cannot really assess legal issues like copyright or personal data, so data protection, if you do not understand what's going on in this. This is one of the charts of one of the publications I made to show is how does personal data end up in a model or not? What is really stored in there? How do these concepts work? I've written that for lawyers. Get them understand that they are in principle open, but they always believe they are too stupid to understand what's really going on. But it's not so difficult. So do that, and it will help you a lot, because what I also saw on my side is that when I realized what's going on, I changed certain views that I had. I had to understand, okay, there is this issue of memorization with a large language model. But it's not that everything is stored in there and is getting out. It's actually something where you see, okay, oh, actually the risks are not so high, or you can control them in this or that manner. And it's not everything that the model has seen during training comes up and pops up. Even though you also will understand, and you know that maybe, but most lawyers know, is that many of the top engineers in this area still themselves don't know exactly what's happening. And these are things you need to talk with them about. And actually, you also need to talk with them and find out what is actually really AI. What are we talking about? And if you look at the definition, for example, in the AI Act, which is the most prevalent definition, it's also the one that the OECD uses, then you will see that there is actually not really a clear understanding what we're talking about. And according to the definition, every copy machine that has OCR in it is AI because it has neural networks in there for character recognition. I mean, this exists for 20 years, so we could say it's nothing new and nothing special and nothing risky, but this is AI. And since people don't know that AI is in there, but they're interacting with it, actually, according to the AI Act, you should put a label on, you're now dealing with AI if you use the copy machine. Now, you're smiling, and the lawyers and the lawmakers who wrote this didn't think about that because they themselves didn't understand what the definition is really about. And if you look at the definition, most of these elements in there, when you talk to the engineers, they would say, this applies to every system we have. I mean, I don't have a computer system that has no effect on the outside. If it's just a box like a black hole that sucks in information and doesn't do anything, actually it sucks in information and maybe something is not there anymore. But here, if you look at these definitions, they don't really work. You have one element in there, this is this autonomy, which, however, many people also don't really understand what it means. Practically, it means that everything that is not only programmed, but is also trained in some way is AI. But even that concept is not really good and doesn't really live up to the end, but we have to live with it. And the interesting thing is here that people seem to know what AI is, including your lawyers, because they think of ChatGPT or these kind of things, but they maybe not thinking about analytical AI systems, so not generative AI. So if you want to actually find out some regulation for your own company, you have to define where does it actually start. And today, in many companies, they don't have yet full governance programs about AI with regard to the legal issues. They're first now in the process of finding out which applications actually should be in scope for such discussions. And that's basically what's going on. So you should also talk with them and get a common understanding is what is AI really about? What do we include in that area? Because you have many computer systems and all of them have to fulfill, of course, data protection laws. So it's not something that stands out with each aspect of it. And there are other things. You see random forest is clearly considered as AI, but what about linear regression? Is that already AI? Now things start. Lawyers, of course, most of them won't know what linear regression is. But for example, in an insurance company, it's a very important aspect, which also is relevant because the AI Act says if you calculate premiums in certain areas, and if it's AI, then you have a totally different regulation than if not. So those are questions that you will have to address first because before we start talking about any consequences. Then educate them also about the security aspects. Here are some things that I've done. You know much more. There are very good frameworks for that, but discuss it with them so that they understand where are the security issues, because most of them fear that you have an issue about generative AI producing wrong results or you can't rely on them, but they have no view yet of the security aspects of it, which may be much more important. So it's much bigger issue whether someone can, with a prompt injection, hack actually the chatbot than the chatbot giving a wrong response. These kind of things, so you get access, for example, to customer data that's in a RAG database behind a chatbot. These kind of things, this is much more important, so you have to tell them. They won't come up with that on their own. And you yourself find out about what are the legal issues they are afraid of or they are considering. I have here 18 points that we tell lawyers if they come to ask us what shall we look for. These are the 18 points, and think about what your answers would be to those. The main issue today from a legal point of view is data protection still. So whenever you have personal data in there, if it relates to some kind of individual that can or could be identified, then that's personal data. And then make sure you can answer these questions or you have an understanding. That's what's going on in their mind. And the moment you come to them and say, we have thought of that, retention, we come up with retention periods, we tell you, no, there is no automated decision. You will already see some relief on their faces because you have thought of these issues. There are some other parts like confidentiality, which is a big issue, but this is more about not AI, it's more about the providers that you may rely on for using AI if you go to an external cloud service provider. So many of these issues that we see today in practice is not about the actual AI part, but it's about using Azure, using Google, using OpenAI, you name them, and how those contracts deal with it. For example, in Microsoft, one of the key discussions is the ever-changing contract, of course. We have that somehow under control. And then there is this abuse monitoring where Microsoft people will look at what you write if there is something that they don't like. And that's, for example, a problem with some. So you have to deal with that. But this is not AI as such. It's about dealing with the provider. And so that's very often much bigger issue than the actual AI part. Copyright is often cited by lawyers, but is in practice not really such a big issue for most of you. So this is more like a bit an academic discussion. And of course, if you are in the content industry, then that's a different thing. But most of you will not be, so it's less an issue for you in most companies that you have. And the AI Act, I have published a lot about that. Read it and you will understand that for most applications that you have, it's not relevant for you because it's basically a product safety regulation. It's not a regulation of AI in general. It's about where do we have particularly risky products and what do you need to do with them? And everyone is trying to avoid getting such products. So we expect that maybe 5 to 10% of the systems will actually be in this high-risk area. And then there are some transparency requirements, but it's not something that will change most of the projects. And then there is this other stuff where everyone is talking about ethical AI. I don't like that term because this is not what people think about is ethics. It's more about reputation. What can we do so we don't create a shitstorm? And a startup can do things that everyone says, super, what they're doing. And if a large company does the same thing, they say, shame on you. And this is more like, what can you do from a reputational point of view? And that's something you need to consider. And accept that if you go then and ask the lawyers that there are many things they can't really give you an answer. They come up with these questions, but they don't know the answer. They come up with the questions because it sounds good. For example, explainability is one of my favorites. They come up and say, we need explainable results. Tell me how the LLM created this result. And then they expect you to come up with a very precise explanation. And if you ask them, what does explainability mean? If you dive a bit deeper, you will see that they have no idea. It's just because they are unsure how to deal with it. They want basically that you give them some comfort on that. And we have to understand that certain things, we can have certain concepts on how to deal with it, how to make it more secure from a technical point of view, but also from a content point of view. But we have to accept that we today do not yet have established standards. And even the AI Act, which has tons of these terms in there, everyone you ask, they can't really tell you what it exactly means. So that will take a few years. And that's also good. So give it the time to develop and come up with your own concepts on how to deal with that. For example, explainability. One of it is that you say, okay, if I have two different models, both in analytical or in generative AI, and let's run them against each other and see, and if it's both coming to the same point and it makes sense to me as a human, then it's explainable. And I mean, we humans also cannot explain. If you see a cat somewhere, you immediately know it's a cat, but you can't explain why. You can explain afterwards why it makes sense that you say this is a cat. So the same thing is true with AI. But there, many people say we need more security. So they have higher, let's say, requirements on the part of AI, and accept that the lawyers can't really tell you what exactly that at the end means. This means that you need to go to a risk-based approach. And here, the point is, that's also one of the tools, and you can download them all for free. There, what we're seeing is that in the beginning, AI was always high risk. Everything you're doing with AI was high risk. And now people slowly understand that actually it's not so dangerous as they believed. So it's now getting more and more relaxed, and it's necessary that you actually really find a way how to define the risk categories of AI that you're using, that you really focus on those that have high risks, and the others, some companies even today say, we don't care, just do it. And they give certain guardrails to it, but that's something you need to understand, and that's perfectly fine from a legal point of view, is that you come up and basically define what is where you see big issues for you and what is something that you can leave away. For example, I mean, many lawyers would still say, we're not sure we can allow people to use ChatGPT with personal data. For most companies, this is even legally not a problem. It's more like a question, do you trust people that they use this tool right? But it's much better in such a situation that you say, okay, we define a number of tools where we have looked at the contracts, where everything is fine, and that they can use instead of them using their own tools, which you don't have under control. So give them something to work with and focus on those areas where it's really a big problem. And one example, for example, is the use of chatbots on websites. There are some people who say in the legal community, chatbots on websites is a problem because this thing can give a wrong response. And there were even some big court cases that had headlines all over the world. You may have seen the Air Canada case, where the chatbot gave a wrong response on a discount. It was about 500 Swiss francs. And they made a court case out of this. And that was actually the big problem, that they made a court case out of this. Every call center agent, or every call center, you will have agents giving wrong advice. That's not really such a problem. So in such a situation, if you say, okay, we accept that there will be a certain percentage of wrong advice that our chatbot gives, but it still saves us $1 million. Then it's a big business. So do it, move forward, accept these type of risks, and focus maybe on other aspects where you have bigger issues with regard to using AI from a risk perspective. And the moment you come up with such a risk matrix where you can say, okay, we distinguish between higher risks and lower risks, or even insignificant risks, then you also get the relief on the legal side, because the lawyers, they never decide. They want you to decide, or the business to decide, the first line of defense. And if you say, okay, we take that risk, then they're happy as well. So ask them the right questions. Don't ask them, is this compliant? But is this basically something where the risks are more or less manageable? And in that regard, know the legal triggers. What triggers them? So if you avoid these type of things that I've listed here, or are careful about them, then you already are pretty safe. So if you have something about biometrics or emotion or dealing with employees in some way, that's always red flags. Other red flags are automated decisions or third-party service providers that haven't gone through basically the normal vetting that you need, not because of AI, but because of how you deal with providers. So understand those triggers. ask for ways how you can play around, because most of the AI I'm seeing is about experimental, and it's something where you basically want to do certain things and ask your lawyers for sandboxes and come up with your own risk mitigation measures. We have offered here also a number of tools that you can use for these exercises, and at the end go and push for a proper governance, even if you don't like it. Here are the issues that we usually recommend the lawyers to take and implement in their company. It's of course a certain bureaucracy, but it is at the end something that will help you even if you hadn't had to do this in the past. I had companies coming and saying, our engineers tell us we do this AI stuff since 20 years and only now you come to us and talk to us about it. We have never had to do all this kind of thing, but at the end it helps. So go for a proper governance. Which brings me to the last advice is go and talk to the lawyers early enough. Maybe you have seen the headlines about a large Swiss insurance company using this device, allegedly, which listens in an office. You place this in an office, and it listens how often do the employees laugh. And if they don't laugh enough often, then the AI triggers that sends out via email jokes to the people. So they are more happy. This is the type of more like legal nightmare, because if you look at it, this is one of the few prohibited activities under the AI Act. This is emotion recognition, or you could call it as emotion recognition at the workplace. Now, I've yesterday seen one of the guys of the lawyers of that insurance company, and I asked him about this and how did you deal with that? And he was mad, absolutely mad, because he was in his vacation and he got a call about all this stuff. Legal didn't really know about that. So they just launched it, or actually they're not even using it, he told me, but it's something which now is creating a lot of problems just because someone had an idea. And I think the idea is not bad, but it's something where you can avoid a lot of problems and maybe go and talk with some people before you do these kind of issues. And I'm looking forward to what they will do on that. He gave me the authorization to say that he didn't know about that stuff. And we'll see what will happen. So it's still on the website. And maybe if you have asked lawyers before, you could maybe even have found ways how to do that in a more controlled manner. Which brings me to the end. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, David. And now it's time for questions. Do we have questions from the audience? People are thinking hard about questions. Let me have the first. There we go. We have a microphone, but it's over there, so I give you mine for the moment.
Thanks for the talk. You mentioned risk-based approach versus full compliance. How do I teach that?
Actually, lawyers are open to that. They are. You just don't, yeah, they are. You just don't have to ask them, is this compliant? They're happy, actually, if you come about that with them. That's my experience. They understand that there is never certainty. So if you ask a lawyer, or if you ask them to write a memo, they will not come to you usually and say, this is legal. They will usually come to you and say, there are good arguments to do that. Or I believe this is okay. So they're actually already using that, but don't force them to make extreme statements. And that's how you teach it with them. So use that in mind when talking with them and say, can you say us what is the biggest risk here? And would that be a way of dealing with it? And offer them someone who takes the risk. Because that's the important stuff, the other part, because in the 3 lines of defense model, you always have the first line, and they have to take the risk because they also have the benefit, not the lawyers.
All right, thanks.
Thanks,
I see a lot of
Fabian.
people nodding. In the security, it's the same, actually. It's the same. Yes, yes.
All right, we have time for one more question. Is there one? If not, David, can you tell us something about the state of affairs in Switzerland from the government perspective, from the public administration?
Yes. Actually, we're waiting in the next few months for the Federal Council to come up with their idea of how to regulate this in Switzerland. Most professionals, so people like me in that area, they believe that there will not be a lot. So there will be a big report, but it will say that most of the concepts we actually already have in law will be sufficient to regulate these AI things. Maybe some aspects in product regulation, so medical devices, these type of things, so that we can easily sell products across the border. Maybe in some sectors, insurance companies, very specific things, but maybe some, and that's what a lot of people hope, maybe some provisions for some laws, for example, copyright, that give certainty that you can use AI, which is the other way around, so that we can say, look, come to Switzerland. In Switzerland, you have a more secure, a more safe basis to use AI, which I think would be a very good opportunity, because if you look at things like the AI Act, it's terrible. It increases the costs so much to all, including all the audit companies, etc., and that adds to the bill, and we can do this a bit better in Switzerland. And I have a feeling, I have at least a hope, that the Federal Council will go in that direction.
Great. So innovation through a certain degree of freedom,
Yes.
making things possible. Thank you so much, David. Please join me in giving an applause.